Chapter 1. The Day I Signed Without a Word. I signed the divorce papers without a single argument, without asking for money, without even looking up, while my husband sat there smiling, convinced he had won everything, not knowing I had already discovered his affair with my closest friend, and that my silence was not surrender, it was a decision. My name is Evelyn, and this is not a story about losing a marriage. It is about what happens when everyone underestimates the woman who knows exactly when to walk away. I remember the sound of the pen more than anything else, the faint scratch against paper in a quiet office where no one expected drama. It was a Tuesday morning in October of 2024, early enough that the sidewalks in Northern Virginia were still damp from overnight rain. The trees outside the window had started to turn, not all at once, just enough to remind you that something was ending whether you were ready or not. The law office was small, tucked between a dental clinic and a real estate agency. Neutral walls, neutral furniture, neutral faces. Everything about the place suggested efficiency and finality. This was not where emotions came to live. This was where they were processed and filed away. Thomas sat across from me, relaxed in his chair, one ankle resting casually over his knee. At 47, he looked exactly like a man who believed this moment was working in his favor. His suit was tailored, his expression controlled, his voice steady when he spoke to the attorney beside him. He had rehearsed this. I could tell by the way he leaned forward slightly, by the way his hands rested open on the table, confident and calm. The attorney slid the papers toward me, thick enough to matter, thin enough to end a life I had lived for 18 years. "Take your time," she said gently, her voice professional but not unkind. I nodded once and picked up the pen. Thomas glanced at me then, just for a second. There was something like relief in his eyes, maybe even triumph. He had expected questions, objections, tears, something that would slow this down or complicate it, something that would require him to explain himself again. I gave him none of that. I signed where the tabs marked my name, initialed where the yellow stickers pointed, turned the pages without hesitation. I did not ask about assets. I did not ask about spousal support. I did not ask about the house, the accounts, the business. I did not look up. The attorney hesitated once, her pen hovering in the air. She glanced at Thomas, then back at me, as if checking for a signal she might have missed. When none came, she cleared her throat and continued. Within 10 minutes, it was done. Thomas smiled. Not a wide smile, just enough to show satisfaction, the kind of smile a man wears when he believes he has closed a deal on favorable terms. He thought I did not understand the law. He thought I did not understand money. He thought my silence meant confusion, maybe even fear. He thought wrong. I stood, gathered my purse, and thanked the attorney. My voice did not shake. I did not rush. I did not linger. Thomas rose as well, buttoning his jacket, already shifting mentally into whatever came next for him. I did not ask what that was. As I walked toward the door, I felt his eyes on my back, waiting for something. A crack, a sign that this mattered more to me than I was letting on. I did not give him that either. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. I took one slow breath, then another. Cars passed. A woman walked her dog down the block. Life continued at a pace that felt almost insulting in its normalcy. That was when the memory surfaced, uninvited and vivid. Lauren Whitfield, standing in my kitchen 3 summers earlier, barefoot on the tile, sipping iced tea from one of my glasses. Lauren, who had known me since my early 30s, who had held my hand during my second pregnancy, who had sat beside me at school plays and birthday dinners. Lauren, who knew where we kept the spare key and which drawer held the good napkins. Lauren, who had been sleeping with my husband. I had found out in late 2023, quietly, without confrontation. A calendar entry that did not match, a receipt that did not belong, a pattern that made sense only when you stopped refusing to see it. I followed the trail the way I always did, patiently, methodically, without emotion clouding the process. When I knew for certain, I did nothing. I did not scream, I did not accuse. I did not call Lauren or Thomas in the middle of the night. I kept showing up. I kept cooking dinner. I kept listening when Thomas talked about work, about expansion plans, about the future he assumed I would never question. They mistook my calm for ignorance. They mistook my stillness for surrender. Thomas had started working late more often in 2022. Lauren had started texting me less around the same time. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. People get busy, marriages shift, friendships evolve. By the time the truth was undeniable, I had already begun preparing in ways they never noticed. I had spent my career analyzing risk, understanding compliance, spotting vulnerabilities long before they became disasters. Yet, somewhere along the way, inside my marriage, I had allowed myself to be reduced to a background role, not because I lacked intelligence, but because it was easier, because it kept the peace, because women like me are often praised for being supportive and quiet, not for being sharp. The morning I signed those papers, Thomas believed he was freeing himself from a woman who did not ask questions. What he did not know was that I had stopped explaining myself a long time ago. As I walked down the steps of the law office, my phone buzzed in my bag. I did not check it. I already knew who it would be from, or who it would not. There would be no apology waiting there, no moment of clarity, just the steady hum of a life rearranging itself without my consent. I paused on the sidewalk and let the moment settle. Not grief, not anger, something quieter and heavier. Resolution. This was not the day I lost my marriage. This was the day I stopped justifying my silence. I turned toward my car and thought about the year ahead, about the conversations that would come, about the assumptions people would make when they heard how quickly I had signed, how easily I had walked away. They would say I gave up too fast, that I let him win, that I didn't fight hard enough for what was mine. What they didn't understand yet is that sometimes walking quietly away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's a decision. And if you were listening to this story, sitting somewhere with your own questions and your own moments of silence, I want to ask you something. When you already know the truth, is it braver to shout it out loud or to wait and choose your moment to leave on your own terms? Chapter 2. They called it my loss. The truth has a strange way of changing how you hear everything that comes after it. Once you know, you start noticing what people choose not to say, how their voices soften around you, how conversations end a second too early. In the weeks after the divorce, I became a quiet lesson for everyone else, a cautionary tale wrapped in politeness. No one said it directly, but I could feel it in every pause. Poor Evelyn. She signed too fast. She let him go. She did not fight. Friends stopped asking questions they were afraid of answering. Family members checked in with that careful tone people use when they assume you are fragile. Even strangers seemed to sense something was off, like grief had a smell you could not wash away. Thomas did not hide. By Thanksgiving, he and Lauren were no longer pretending. They posted photos online, dinners out, smiling selfies, captions about new beginnings and unexpected happiness. She wore his jacket in one picture, the same jacket he used to leave on the back of my chair when we went out to dinner. I notice things like that now. Details had always mattered to me. The first time I saw them together in person was at his parents' house in Fairfax at the end of December, a family gathering that had been scheduled long before the divorce but went forward anyway because canceling it would have required an explanation no one wanted to have. I almost did not go, not because I was afraid of seeing them, but because I knew exactly how it would look. The ex-wife showing up out of obligation while the new woman took her place. But Daniel wanted to go, and Sophie did not say much at all, which usually meant she was watching closely. So I went. Lauren arrived 10 minutes after we did. She walked in like she belonged there, confident but careful, dressed in soft colors, hair styled just enough to suggest effort without appearing desperate. She hugged Thomas' mother first, then his sister, then turned to me with a smile that hovered between apology and ownership. She said my name softly, as if testing how it sounded in her mouth now. I nodded. That was all. Thomas stayed close to her, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back, a gesture he had perfected over years of marriage. He looked comfortable, proud even, as if this scene confirmed something he had already decided was right. At dinner, he did something that settled the room without anyone realizing it had happened. He introduced Lauren, properly, not as a guest, not as a friend, but as someone who would be around. Lauren works in marketing, he said, smiling at her, then glancing down the table at me. She understands how things grow, how to build value. There it was, small, clean, precise. The implication hung in the air long enough for me to register it fully. He had not said I did not understand money. He did not need to. The message was clear. He believed he had outgrown me, that my silence during the divorce had been proof of my limits. Lauren laughed lightly and added that some people just aren't wired for the financial side of things and that there was nothing wrong with that. Not everyone needs to be involved in decisions. Some people prefer peace. I watched my son stiffen beside me. Daniel glanced between us, his jaw tightening, and relaxed again as if convincing himself not to make something out of nothing. Sophie did not look away. Her eyes stayed on Lauren, her expression unreadable. I did not respond. I took a sip of my drink. I passed the bread. I asked Thomas' sister about her new job. I let the conversation move on because I had already learned that defending yourself in a room where people have decided who you are is a losing exercise. After dinner, Helen pulled me aside in the kitchen. She had always liked me in a distant, evaluative way. I had never been her first choice for her son, but I had been acceptable. She told me she was sorry things had turned out this way, that marriages require effort from both sides, that sometimes a woman needs to fight harder to hold things together. Her words were wrapped in concern, but the meaning was old and familiar. If I had been stronger, smarter, more willing to bend, this would not have happened. I thanked her for the advice and went to find my coat. On the drive home, Daniel asked why I had not said anything. His voice was careful, like he was afraid of the answer. You let them talk like that, like you didn't matter. I told him sometimes people reveal more about themselves when you let them speak freely, that arguing doesn't always change the outcome. He nodded, but I could tell he was not convinced. Sophie did not say anything. She stared out the window, absorbing every detail the way she always had. What they didn't know was that while everyone else was busy narrating my failure, I had already started reorganizing my life in quieter ways. I met Rachel Bloom for coffee 2 days after Christmas at a small place near her office. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, composed, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. We talked about trust structures, about long-term planning, about how assumptions become liabilities when no one checks them. I met Michael Grant the following week. We sat in his office reviewing documents that had been filed years earlier and forgotten by everyone except me. He did not ask why now, he just asked what I wanted the outcome to be. Clarity, I said. Control, no surprises. He nodded like that made perfect sense. For most of my marriage, I had played a supporting role by choice. I let Thomas believe he was the decision maker, the visionary, the one steering the ship. It had been easier that way, less friction, less explaining. I had mistaken peace for partnership. My work had always been about identifying risk before it became visible, yet at home, I had ignored the slow erosion of respect, the subtle ways I had been edited out of conversations that mattered. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with the divorce agreement spread out in front of me, page after page of language designed to look final, clean, complete. I read it slowly, not with the eyes of a woman who had lost something, but with the attention of someone who understood systems. That's when I saw it, a single clause buried where no one expected it to matter, the kind of detail people skip when they believe the outcome is already decided. I did not smile. I did not feel victorious. I closed the folder, turned off the light, and went upstairs. Somewhere between the pity and the assumptions, between the looks I was given and the ones I returned, something had shifted. They thought this was my loss. I knew better. I just wasn't ready to explain why. Chapter 3. The Part He Never Read. Understanding always came easier to me than reacting. While everyone around me assumed I was still recovering from the divorce, I was doing what I had always done best. I was reviewing systems. I was tracing patterns. I was reading what others had skimmed. I started with the records. Late evenings at the dining table turned into long nights with folders spread out in careful rows. Bank statements from as far back as 2012, corporate filings, partnership agreements, share allocations, emails saved and archived by habit, not suspicion. I was not looking for betrayal anymore. I was looking for structure. The truth was, Thomas had never liked paperwork. He liked results. He liked meetings that ended with handshakes and optimism. The fine print bored him. He trusted professionals to handle that. He trusted me too, until he stopped needing to. In 2015, when I transitioned into independent consulting, we made what seemed like a simple decision at the time: a family trust. Nothing dramatic, just a clean way to manage investments, reduce exposure, keep things organized. Thomas agreed without much interest. I remembered the conversation clearly. "It makes sense," he had said, glancing at his phone. "You handle that stuff better than I do." He had signed without asking questions. So had I. Back then, the trust felt like a precaution, a responsible move, something you did when life was stable and predictable. I never imagined it would become relevant this way, but relevance has a way of revealing itself when pressure is applied. Rachel Bloom sat across from me in her office one afternoon, glasses balanced low on her nose as she reviewed the documents I had brought. She did not rush. She never did. "This clause here," she said, tapping the page lightly, "this is what matters." I leaned forward. "It gives the trust reversionary control under specific conditions, which means any major transaction tied to assets held through it requires explicit approval from the trustee." "Which is me?" I said quietly. She nodded. "Which is you." The words landed without fanfare, but the implications settled heavily in my chest. Rachel looked up then. "Thomas cannot sell. He cannot leverage. He cannot restructure anything that touches these holdings without your written consent." I let the silence stretch. "Does his attorney know this?" I asked. Rachel smiled, but it was not a warm one. "If they read the agreement carefully, yes." I thought of the way Thomas had signed the divorce papers, the confidence, the speed. "They did not read it," I said. Rachel did not argue. "The shift did not happen all at once. It never does. It starts as resistance, delays, questions no one expected to be asked. Thomas called me 3 weeks later, the first time since the divorce. "Did you change something?" he asked, irritation barely contained. "I did not change anything," I said. "I just stopped ignoring it." He scoffed. "My attorney says a deal is stalled because of you." "Because of the trust," I corrected. There was a pause on the line, a longer one than usual. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You never cared about this before." I almost laughed. "I always cared," I said. "I just did not need to prove it." He hung up without saying goodbye. Lauren tried next, not directly. She sent a text asking if we could talk, something about closure, about moving forward. I did not respond. What I did instead was send an email, not to Thomas, not to Lauren, to the board liaison overseeing one of the pending transactions. Short, polite, factual. It outlined the trust structure, it referenced the clause, it stated that no approval had been granted. Nothing more. Within 48 hours, the deal was frozen. Thomas called Rachel that afternoon. She told me later. "He's looking for someone to blame," she said. "He thinks his attorney missed something." "Did they?" I asked. "They assumed it would never be enforced." I pictured Thomas pacing his office, frustration replacing certainty. I pictured Lauren beside him, realizing that proximity to confidence does not equal control. Money had always been their shared language, success their bond. Now that language was breaking down. Michael Grant joined us the following week. He confirmed what Rachel already knew. The trust was airtight, filed correctly, maintained meticulously. There was no emotional argument to be made here, only legal reality. This was set up with foresight, not aggression. That mattered to me. I had not done this to hurt Thomas. I had done it to protect myself long before he gave me a reason. The emails began arriving daily after that. Questions framed as concerns, concerns framed as urgency. I responded only when necessary, briefly, professionally. One afternoon, Daniel came home early from class. He found me at the table again, papers spread out, laptop open. "You're working a lot," he said. "I always have," I replied. He hesitated. "Dad says you're making things difficult." I closed the laptop and looked at him. "I'm making things clear," I said. "There's a difference." He studied my face, searching for anger, maybe bitterness. He found neither. Later that night, Sophie came downstairs, quietly, and sat across from me. "They keep asking things," she said. "Who?" I asked. "People," she said. "About you." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "They can ask," I said. "I'm not hiding." The moment I finally sent the formal notice felt smaller than I expected. Just a few lines, clear language, no emotion. It outlined the trust authority, the requirement for consent, the absence of that consent. Rachel reviewed it once, then nodded. "This will change the tone," she said. I knew that already. When Thomas received it, he did not call. He did not text. He went silent. That silence told me everything. Power does not announce itself. It reveals itself when assumptions collapse. As I closed the folder that night, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, relief. I had not raised my voice. I had not demanded recognition. I had simply stepped back into a role I had never truly left. Understanding is a quiet kind of leverage. And if you've ever wondered whether knowledge matters when no one expects you to use it, ask yourself this: how many people are counting on you never reading the part they skipped? Chapter 4. When everything started to slip. By the start of 2025, my name began circulating again, but this time without attachment. Not as Thomas Mercer's former wife, not as a quiet presence in the background of someone else's success, just my name, followed by my work. It was subtle at first, an invitation to consult on a compliance review for a regional firm, a referral from someone who remembered how I handled pressure without theatrics, then another, then a request to sit in on a strategy call, not as an observer, but as an authority. I did not announce anything. I updated my professional profile, accepted contracts selectively, and showed up prepared. That was it. The shift on Thomas's side was louder. Projects slowed, meetings dragged. Questions that had once been answered with confidence now circled back without resolution. When deals stalled, the board started asking why. When explanations failed to land, they started looking closer. I heard about it from Michael first. "They are noticing patterns," he said during one of our check-ins. Not panic yet, just concern. Concern was enough. In corporate environments, it always is. Thomas called Rachel twice that month. She did not share details, only tone. He sounds defensive, which means he feels cornered. I pictured him in his office, pacing, gesturing, insisting that the delays were temporary, that external factors were to blame, that everything would stabilize soon. I had heard that voice before. At home, the shift was quieter, but deeper. Daniel stopped repeating his father's talking points. He asked questions instead, about timelines, about decisions that did not make sense. One evening, he mentioned a conversation he overheard, something Thomas had said about the trust being a complication he had not expected. "You knew," Daniel said, not accusing, just surprised. "I read," I replied. That seemed to settle something in him. Sophie did not ask. She observed. She noticed which calls went unanswered, which explanations changed, which adults avoided eye contact when certain names came up. She had always understood more than people gave her credit for. The first time I stepped into a meeting connected to a project Thomas had once dismissed, I felt a familiar steadiness. Not adrenaline, not excitement, just alignment. It was a logistics optimization initiative tied to regional infrastructure. Boring by most standards, high risk if mishandled, exactly my kind of work. When my role became official, no announcement was made, no congratulations exchanged. It was simply noted in the documentation, a shift in oversight, a redistribution of authority. Thomas found out 2 days later. He did not call me then. He sent a message that said, "We need to talk." I did not respond. Lauren's fall was faster and quieter. Marketing circles can be unforgiving when confidence is exposed as overreach. When your proximity to power is mistaken for competence, the correction is swift. One contract did not renew. Another was postponed. Then a client asked questions she could not answer. I saw her once, unexpectedly, at a networking event I attended on behalf of a client. She stood near the bar, scanning the room, recalibrating. When our eyes met, she hesitated, then looked away. No confrontation, no words exchanged. That was enough. The relief I felt surprised me, not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer had to pretend I was smaller than I was. I did not have to cushion my language or soften my conclusions. I spoke plainly. I was heard. One evening, Thomas finally called. "He wants to meet," he said. His voice was tight, controlled. "We should talk like adults." I looked at my calendar, at the quiet order I had rebuilt around myself. "Send me a time," I said. He paused. "You do not sound angry." "I am not," I replied. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a moment, not bracing myself, just noticing. Things were slipping for him, slowly, selectively, not because I pushed, but because I stopped holding them in place. That night, Sophie sat beside me on the couch. "You seem lighter," she said. "I stopped carrying things that were not mine," I answered. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I felt no need to explain anything at all. When Thomas's message came through later with the proposed meeting place, I read it once, then set my phone down. There was nothing urgent about this anymore, just one last conversation waiting to happen. Chapter 5. I didn't win the divorce. I won my life. I chose the cafe because it did not belong to either of us. It sat on a busy corner in Arlington, all glass windows and light wood tables, the kind of place people came to work on laptops or meet briefly before moving on with their day. No memories attached, no emotional leverage, just neutral ground in broad daylight. Thomas was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached, a reflex he had not quite unlearned yet. He looked older than he had a year ago, not dramatically so, but in the way stress settles into a person when certainty leaves them. His suit was still expensive, his posture still practiced, but something in his eyes kept searching, as if the ground beneath him was no longer fixed. We ordered coffee, black for him, tea for me. That had not changed. For a moment, we sat in silence, the hum of conversation around us filling the space where explanations used to live. I let him speak first, not out of politeness, but because I already knew what he needed to say. "I underestimated you," he said finally. There it was, clean, direct, no apology yet, just an admission framed as clarity. "You always downplayed what you did. I thought you preferred it that way." I nodded once, not agreement, acknowledgement. "You thought I was comfortable being invisible," I said. He winced slightly, then leaned forward. "I thought we had a system. You handled details, I handled direction. And when that system stopped working for me," I said, "you replaced me." His jaw tightened. "That is not fair." "It is accurate," I replied. He exhaled, rubbing his hands together the way he did when he was trying to recalibrate. "I am not here to argue. I am here to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. He hesitated, then said it. "We could work together. You have leverage, experience. We built things once. We could do it again, cleanly this time. I watched him carefully as he spoke, the way he framed collaboration as repair, the way he still believed outcomes could be negotiated if the right tone was used. I am not interested in rebuilding what I already left, I said. He looked surprised. You would rather see it fail? I am not trying to see anything fail, I said. I am trying to live without explaining myself to someone who only listens when it costs them something. That landed harder than I expected. He sat back, absorbing it. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. I know. You just did not want to consider me. We sat with that for a moment. The truth did not need embellishment. He tried again, softer this time. Lauren is not doing well. I did not ask for details. I already knew enough. Contracts lost, invitations stopped, the illusion of access fading quickly once power became conditional. That is her responsibility, I said. You could have stopped it, he said. I met his eyes. I did not cause it. The distinction mattered. I had not called anyone, had not warned anyone, had not blocked or sabotaged. I had simply stepped into my own authority and let consequences arrange themselves. Lauren had believed proximity was enough, that being chosen by Thomas meant she would inherit stability. She had mistaken access for control, just as he had mistaken my silence for absence. Neither of those misunderstandings were mine to correct. Thomas stared down at his cup. I thought you would fight, I said. I did, just not the way you expected. He nodded slowly. I see that now. We finished our drinks without ceremony. No raised voices, no dramatic exit. When we stood to leave, he paused. You won the divorce. I shook my head. No, I did not. He looked confused. I won my life, I said. Those are not the same thing. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had any right to. I walked to my car without looking back. That evening, I cooked dinner for the kids. Simple food, familiar routines. Daniel talked about a class he was considering next semester. Sophie showed me a draft of something she was writing, careful but hopeful. They were steady now, not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. Later, after the dishes were done and the house settled into its quiet, I sat alone and thought about the version of myself who had once believed endurance was the same as strength, who had stayed silent to preserve harmony, who had mistaken being needed for being valued. I had not become louder, I had become clearer. Success, I realized, was not proving someone wrong. It was no longer needing their permission to be right. Lauren faded from my life entirely after that, not with a confrontation or a final word, but with absence, the kind that leaves no echo. Her ambition had outpaced her foundation, and when the structure wavered, there was nothing underneath to hold it up. I did not celebrate that. I learned from it. The work I do now fits me. The people I work with know my name before my history. My children see me not as someone who endured, but as someone who chose. And if you have listened this far, maybe you recognize something of yourself in the story. The meetings where you stayed quiet, the moments where you were underestimated because you did not perform your worth out loud, the times you were told that walking away meant losing. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence is not weakness when it's chosen. It is space. It is preparation. It is the moment you stop asking to be seen and start deciding where you belong. So I will leave you with this. If you have ever been dismissed, overlooked, or quietly replaced, I want to hear your story. Tell me about the moment you realized you didn't have to fight to be free. Stay here. Stay listening. There are more stories like this, and they don't all end in shouting. Sometimes they end with clarity.